Hello, and welcome to today's Climate Month webinar, Data-Driven Approaches to Planning for Extreme Heat, hosted by the Maryland Department of Planning in partnership with the Smart Growth Network. My name is Jill Lemke. I serve as the Manager of Planning Engagement at the Maryland Department of Planning. I also serve as a member of the Smart Growth Network Steering Committee. The Smart Growth Network is a national alliance of advocates, practitioners, policymakers, and local leaders working toward a shared vision for land use and infrastructure policies and actions that result in healthy, equitable, sustainable, and prosperous communities for all. In addition to hosting webinars, we provide information on effective planning, development, and preservation practices. The Smart Growth Network website is undergoing a transition, so please stay tuned for updates. Today's webinar is one in a series of webinars hosted by the Maryland Department of Planning on a sustainable growth and related topics. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted along with past webinars for viewing via the Maryland Department of Planning's website at planning.maryland.gov or by visiting our YouTube channel. The Department of Planning website also provides valuable information on planning initiatives, tools, and educational opportunities, including information on future webinars. While you are there, please subscribe to our newsletter to learn more about our upcoming programs. It is important to note that the views expressed by the speakers are those of the speaker and not necessarily those of the Maryland Department of Planning, the State of Maryland, or the Smart Growth Network. Viewers of this live event are eligible to receive 1.5 CM credits or 1 Sustainability and Resilience Specialty credit from the American Planning Association. To receive your credits, please visit the APA's website, planning.org, to log into your account and search for the name of today's event. You can also search for event number 9295006. Following the presentation, we will address as many questions as time permits. You can submit a question at any time by opening the Q&A tool in the Zoom control panel. Now, I am pleased to introduce our speakers for today. Lad Keith is an associate professor in the School of Landscape Architecture and Planning and a faculty research associate at the Udall Center for Studies in Public Policy at the University of Arizona. His research focuses on heat planning, policy, and governance to help increase heat resilience of communities, regions, and nations across the world. Among his many research posts, Keith serves as on the Management Committee for Global Heat Health Information Network, a World Health Organization and World Meteorological Organization joint initiative to protect global populations from health risks associated with extreme heat. He has a PhD in Arid Lands Resource Sciences and an MS in Planning from the University of Arizona. Sarah Miro is an associate professor of the School of Geographic Sciences and Urban Planning at the Arizona State University Global Institute of Sustainability and Innovation. She is an interdisciplinary social ecological system scientist working at the intersection of urban geography and planning. Her research tackles the challenge of making cities more resilient in the face of climate change and other social and environmental hazards. She combines conceptual studies with empirical research on the complexities of green infrastructure and climate change adaptation planning in a range of cities. She has a PhD from the University of Michigan School of Natural Resources and Environment and a master's in International Development Studies from the University of Amsterdam in the Netherlands. Zoe Davis serves as a climate resilience project manager on the Climate Ready Boston team in the City of Boston's Environment Department. As a project manager, she supports neighborhood climate resilience planning, the integration of climate change preparedness into municipal projects and planning, as well as the development of preparedness resources for residents and other stakeholders. Before joining the City of Boston, Zoe served with the Mystic River Watershed Association, where she organized habitat restoration projects in public parks and partnered with community groups and local government agencies to create climate education programs and forums for public discourse on coastal resilience. Victoria Ludwig works in the EPA's Office of Community Revitalization, where she helps communities design equitable solutions to challenges, including disaster resilience, highway redevelopment, and extreme heat. She previously managed EPA's Heat Island Reduction Program, where she provided technical and outreach support on the causes, impacts, and mitigation strategies of urban heat islands. Victoria has worked in the environmental field for nearly 30 years, previously focusing on waste reduction, renewable energy, and international climate change issues. She holds a bachelor's degree in biology and a master's in environmental management. In her spare time, she loves practicing Spanish and volunteering as a certified Maryland Master Naturalist. And now it is my pleasure to turn it over to Lad, who will kick off the presentations. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Great, thank you so much, Jill. I will pull up the PowerPoint presentation here. Yeah, so as you mentioned, my colleague Sarah Miro, who's at Arizona State University, and myself, Lad Keith at the University of Arizona, will be presenting our Plan Integration for Resilience Scorecard for Heat project, and focus a little bit on some of the results from Boston specifically. So Sarah and I wrote a guidebook funded through NOAA called Planning for Urban Heat Resilience that was published by the American Planning Association. In this guidebook, we set out 7 principles of urban heat resilience planning, and they are setting clear urban planning goals and associated metrics for success, building a comprehensive fact base for information on heat risks, developing a diverse portfolio of heat mitigation and heat management strategies, managing the uncertainty that comes along with planning for climate change, coordinating across planning efforts, of course, having an inclusive participation process, and effective implementation, monitoring, and evaluation. And so what we'll be focusing on specifically for this PERS for Heat project is that number 5, coordination across planning efforts. And so one really important concept here is the network of plans. And so this is the idea that it's not just a single plan that impacts the built environment and the urban heat island and urban heat profile of a city or a community, but it's really the collection of the community plans that shape the built environment. And on the right-hand side, you can see a collection of common community plans across the United States, ranging from comprehensive or general plans, more common now climate action plans, hazard mitigation plans, of course, that are used to obtain FEMA money, and then functional plans like parks and recs plans and transportation plans. And of course, heat is addressed across all of these different planning types, and we've found that through our other research that we've done looking at plans across the United States. But unfortunately, a lot of these plans are rarely coordinated, and we know this from both our heat research, but as well as other hazards research. And so when hazards plans are not coordinated, they can lead to ineffective or even maladaptive outcomes where you may be unintentionally increasing the hazard that you're trying to reduce. So that's where this idea for the Plan Integration for Resilience Scorecard came from, and this was originally developed for flooding. It's designated the Plan Integration Tool of Choice by the American Planning Association and by FEMA, and again was originally developed specifically for flood hazards. And so the PERS project or approach identifies inconsistencies across a community's network of plans, many of those plans that we previously mentioned on the last slide, systematically evaluates current hazard planning strategies throughout those plans, and then allows you to compare the combined effect of those strategies against hazards and vulnerability. And so there's a guidebook for that available at mitigationguide.org. And again, that one's more specifically directed at flood hazards. So we were funded by NOAA and NIHIS, which is the National Integrated Heat Health Information System, through their Extreme Heat Risk Initiative a few years ago, to essentially adopt the original PERS approach for heat and heat mitigation. And so we went through with that with the team, including myself, Sarah, Joseph DeAngelis at APA, and then our colleague Philip Burke at UNC Chapel Hill. We piloted the PERS for Heat project with 6 partner communities, ranging in different geographies across the United States, and Boston was one of those communities, and then developed the PERS for Heat guidebook that is available at that tinyurl.com PERS for Heat URL at the bottom left-hand or right-hand corner of the screen. So we'll walk through the PERS for heat process and talk a little bit about the results for Boston specifically now. So when you're going through the PERS for heat process, the first area is creating the scorecard. So there's policy tasks. We'll talk about policy scoring, then you map, and then essentially analyze the results from that, and then advance resilience through updating your plans according to the results that you received, and then sharing those results with different communities. And we found a lot of success from that, not just from these 5 original cities, but from the other communities that we've worked with after this original project too. So the first task is the policy task of assembling the network of plans. So this is where you sit down with the community decision makers and really find out what plans can potentially impact the urban heat profile of that community in the future. And so for Boston, it was determined that this was Imagine Boston 2030, Resilient Boston, the Climate Action Plan update, and then their hazard mitigation plan. And you can see on the right-hand side the number of policies that our team scored within each of those plans. Once you have the network of plans for that community that could impact the urban heat island, you generate the list of applicable policies across those plans. And so when we're speaking policies here, we're really referring to specific land use planning related actions that achieve specific goals. And so regulations, programs, designs, interventions, capital improvements. And so we had 2 graduate student coders for improved intercoder reliability. And to be included in our analysis, the policy had to pass what's called the 3-point test. The 3-point test the policy must potentially reduce or increase vulnerability to heat. So it has to have some physical impact on the urban heat island. It has to contain one mappable place-specific term, which could be the whole city. And then it has to contain a recognizable policy tool or form of government intervention to achieve the specific outcomes and objectives. So there were a lot of policies that did not fall into this 3-point test because they weren't specific enough. And so going back, you can see here the potential to reduce or increase vulnerability heat in that Imagine Boston policy example. So it says an active transportation corridor and green space, both of which could reduce the urban heat island effect through reducing waste heat in the first one, and then increasing urban greening in the second one. The mappable or place-specific term in this policy is along Columbia Road, so that's pretty specific. And then the recognizable policy tool in this one is invest. And so we're assuming that it's some kind of capital improvement or other community investment mechanism. Then we code those policies by the policy tool category. And so there's quite a few here, ranging from land use analysis and permitting process, capital improvements, all the way to public facilities. And you can see here some of the results from the policy tool categories from, again, Boston specifically. And these mirror what we found in other communities pretty closely across the nation. But capital improvements quite high on the list here, and then land use analysis and permitting process, development regulations, and then land acquisition, and then the rest of them had 0 scores. We also code the policies for the type of heat mitigation category they fall with under, and this is also derived from our Planning for Urban Heat Resilience APA book. And so these are generally land use heat mitigation, urban greening, things like forestry, vegetated parks, urban design, so things like the street and building orientation, cool pavement use, and then reduction in waste heat. So things like reducing gasoline-powered automobile vehicles or increasing building energy and efficiency to help ensure that the waste heat is reduced in the community too. And these again follow what we found nationwide pretty closely, but showing the different policies within Boston across those network of plans for the heat mitigation strategy category. And so found most of those fell within urban greening or waste heat, urban greening, and land use, and then less on the site-specific urban design. And with that, Sarah, I'll turn it over to you and just let me know when you want me to advance the next slide.
Sure. So thanks, Lad. So once we, in addition to actually categorizing the policies that we find, we also score them based on their likely impact on heat mitigation. So we score them a +1 for a policy if it would mitigate or improve heat, help to cool the city. A -1 if we think it might actually increase heat risks, add heat into the built environment. a 0 if we think it would have a neutral effect. So for example, if you have some additional waste heat in a location, but then you're also planting trees. So we think those would kind of cancel each other out. And then also an unknown impact or a U if we think there would be some effect on heat in the built environment, but it's really kind of hard to tell from the way the policy is written, the level of detail provided in the plan, whether it would actually be a positive or a negative effect. So this is pointing this to the city to say, hey, this is a policy that you'd probably want to look at a little bit more. And so here you can see the breakdown of those scores for the city of Boston. And again, this is actually quite similar, I would say the breakdown to most of the cities that we've looked at. So good news, we see a lot more policies with the potential to mitigate heat. So +1 policies than we do -1 policies, very few of those. But we do find a lot of unknown policies. And so I think this is really an opportunity for communities to, again, look a little more closely at these plan developments and see what their likely impact would be on heat, and think about what options might be to actually help to mitigate it through the development or design of that particular action. So if you go to the next slide. So once we have all those policies scored, we actually map them. So we basically assign the policies to census tracts where they would apply within the city. And we use census tracts just to sort of break up the city into, smaller areas. And again, this is to really help us to see what sort of spatial patterns are. So where in the city is there more heat mitigation policy attention? And sort of what would be the sort of cumulative impact, positive or negative, in terms of mitigating heat in particular neighborhoods. So again, what we do here, fairly simple, we just basically add up the scores for all of the policies that would apply to a particular census tract. We determine where they apply based on the information in the plans. So specifically those place-based terms. So like in the example that Lad provided, that Columbia Road, we would look at which census tracts that stretch of road goes through, and we would assign that particular policy score to that census tract. So once we've done all of that, we add up the scores in each census tract, and that gives us a net score. So positive scores will cancel out negative scores to give this net score. And in this case, we don't, obviously scores of 0 don't really have an effect. And we do not map out the unknown scores because, again, we're not sure whether those would have a negative or positive effect. If you go to the next slide, once we have this scorecard map, if you go to the next slide, then we can compare this net scorecard map with other indicators of heat hazards or vulnerability. So in this particular case of Boston, we use data on average land or mean land surface temperatures within each of the census tracts. And we also use to look at heat hazards, and we also look at a social vulnerability index, the one generated by the CDC. And we, in some of the different cities, we've used different indicators, whatever is sort of most relevant to a particular place. But again, the idea, if you go to the next slide, is that you can actually compare for specific census tracts and you can look at the maps across the city and see basically, do we find spatial alignment between where we have more heat mitigation policies, right? Higher net scores in this case, are these actually the hottest areas of the city or the most socially vulnerable? And in the case of Boston, we actually are quite happy to find that we do see a positive relationship between these. So we can actually quantitatively examine this using simple correlations between census tract net scores, the heat hazard surface temperatures and the social vulnerability index. And this allows us to again, sort of quantitatively assess this spatial alignment. And in Boston's case, we find statistically significant correlations between the net scores, the afternoon temperatures, and the social vulnerability index. And this is what we would hope to see. And actually, Boston was really one of the few cities where we've seen alignment between both of these social vulnerability information and heat hazard information and the net scores. And this is, I think, particularly notable because actually in Boston, the social vulnerability index and these temperatures are not necessarily themselves correlated. So it's, even more challenging for the city to actually target, both of these at the same time. But we do see some evidence of that. So if you go to the next slide, this is sort of the plan integration for resilience scorecard for heat in a nutshell. And I think it can provide some really useful information, spark really interesting conversations, not just about the specifics of these policies, but also sort of what makes for, good policies or action items within plans, right? Are they spatially explicit? Are they using specific enough language that we can actually include them in this kind of analysis and score them? And so I think it can be a very valuable method. But in some of our recent work, particularly the project that Lad and I are both working on, that's funded by the Department of Energy, it's the Southwest Urban Corridor Integrated Field Laboratory. We have expanded some of the plan evaluation work to apply other methods as well, which we think are actually really complementary because, while, again, these specific land use policies in plans are important and, this provides the PERS for heat can provide really useful information, plans can serve other functions, right? We, in the context of heat, plans might identify important goals. They might provide information on heat vulnerability or future heat projections. They might outline the public participation and public engagement process used to develop these actions, right? And this is not necessarily assessed in the PERS for heat. Also, in our framework for thinking about heat planning, heat mitigation is one sort of half of the potential strategies that cities can use to address heat. We also think it's important that they advance heat management strategies as well. These are efforts to not just cool the city, but to manage its impacts to basically reduce negative effects. And so again, the PERS for heat is also not actually mapping these. It's focused on the heat mitigation side. So the plan quality for heat resilience method, a second method that we're using, really looks at weather plans. It's based almost like a checklist of a number of characteristics that we think high quality plans that address heat would contain. These are broken out into sort of 7 principles, which include things like goals, the fact base, again, the information, public participation, coordination, that some of these 7 principles that Lad outlined, we actually have sort of criteria associated with each of those. And we look at whether plans meet these criteria, whether they have these elements. And we also look at the different types of strategies, both heat mitigation and heat management strategies in the plans to basically see, okay, what are they proposing? Just to give a sense of, are they including the full range of potential heat strategies out there? So that's the second method. And then the third method that we've been using is plan cross-referencing, which is really trying to get at the connections between plans in a community. This builds on the recognition that communities develop a lot of different plans that are all going to affect heat. As Lad noted, this is this idea of the network of plans, But the reality is they're often developed by different departments, and they're not necessarily always connected or particularly integrated, and can actually, be in conflict with one another. And so looking at plan cross-referencing, so actually explicitly mapping out which plans reference other plans in the city, can help us to visualize this network and see which plans are really more central, which are explicitly referenced in a lot of other plans, versus which plans maybe are more peripheral or not as well connected to these others. And it's our belief that actually all of these methods really provide useful information. And you can see some examples of the results from each of these for the city of Tempe. All right, if you go to the next slide. So again, just wanted to highlight that here. Another thing that we just wanted to finish here with and mention to all of you is a new center that is funded by NOAA and the National Integrated Heat Health Information System. They actually have just launched 2 centers of excellence, and Lad and I, along with Professor Kelly Turner at UCLA, are co-leading one of them, the Center for Heat Resilient Communities. And the mission of this center is focusing on public health from both acute and chronic heat, focusing on equity, a data-informed, whole of government approach to actually mitigating and managing heat in diverse communities and heat exposure settings. And really what we are doing in this center is we are developing a hopefully pretty comprehensive heat resilient communities framework. So heat planning and plan evaluation, as Lad and I just went over, it's actually just one small part of this framework. And then we are going to work with 30 communities over the next 3 years. We plan for 3 different cohorts to actually apply this framework and help them advance their heat resilience. And the ultimate goal then will be to provide, through this process, actionable strategies that the federal government and communities can use to really enhance their heat resilience. If you go to the next slide, just quickly to show you a little bit more about the center and how it's structured. So again, you can see that we're, the 3 of us who are leading it, but we also have a really big team of heat experts from, across the country who are providing really critical advisory roles. The center is also divided up into, the framework for the center is divided up into 6 cores, which you can see here. And again, heat planning is just one of those. We're also looking at, heat indicators, modeling, community engagement, and benefit cost analysis as well through this center. And so this really has just launched. We haven't even released, we will be later this fall releasing the call for the first cohort of communities. And we're really excited about the potential for this. All right, if you go to the next slide. All right, well, that was all we had. Thank you very much. Just wanted to acknowledge all of the support that we've received for this work, as well as our larger team that has really helped us.
Yeah, thanks so much, Sarah. And again, just to acknowledge the funders. So of course we have through NOAA CLIMAS, the Climate Assessment for the Southwest, the NOAA NIHIS Extreme Heat Risk Initiative, the Department of Energy Southwest Urban Corridor Integrated Field Laboratory that Sarah mentioned. And we've also received some support from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation for some of that, and have a very large team of students who have kind of been educated and have helped us code many of these plans across the country too. So with that, we'll wrap up our part of the presentation and turn it over to Zoe Davis, who is at the City of Boston.
Thank you, Lad. I'm going to just take a moment to share my screen. Okay. So I will be sharing about Boston's heat plan and some examples of implementation projects that we have implemented this summer. So starting with the development of the heat plan, and a bit of context here for you all. Why is heat resilience significant for Boston? From a health and safety perspective, extreme heat is the #1 cause of all weather-related deaths in the US. From a timing and urgency perspective for Boston, we are currently experiencing extreme heat conditions and the effects of climate change. And then from an impact and scale perspective, extreme heat has a vast geographic impact, but it's also personally and individually felt. These impacts and the effects vary and affect every facet of daily life. And then for the local context in Boston, we've historically been a predominantly cold weather city, but as we're experiencing these warmer and longer summers, we'll need to integrate a more hybrid approach that encompasses both a cold weather city perspective and a warm weather city perspective. So in 2022, to look at how we can start to address the impacts of extreme heat, the city of Boston released the heat plan, and this provides a framework or a roadmap for all of the things that we need to do to build heat resilience. I'll also note that the city's heat plan builds upon Climate Ready Boston, which is the initial assessment of looking at coastal flooding impacts and inland flooding impacts and extreme temperature impacts on the city of Boston, and outlines a series of actions for us to address these impacts as well. But the heat plan goes into greater depth into the analysis of extreme heat and then the strategies that we need to take. And just to give a brief overview of climate or of extreme heat risk in the city of Boston, historically, or I should say typically today, we experience around 10 to 12 days over 90 degrees in the summertime. But looking at our future projections, we're seeing that by the 2070s, 50 years from now, it's likely that Boston can experience around 130 days over 80 degrees every year, and also 60 days over 90 degrees every year. And so just in thinking about the context for this, an astronomical summer lasts about 90 days. And so when we talk about what summer will look like in the future for us, we can expect, our summers to be longer overall. And so looking at where some of the hotspots in Boston, you are seeing the daytime air temperature in degrees Fahrenheit, as well as heat duration in the number of hours experiencing extreme heat conditions. These are when temperatures are in the daytime at or above 95 degrees, and in the evening at or above 75 degrees. And so just to point out some of these trends here, looking at the daytime temperature map, the trends that we're seeing in the daytime, they follow areas that have a higher building density, expansive hardscape, and areas that are more exposed to the sun. And so you may see, along some of our transportation corridors, particularly along the Red Line, which runs through Dorchester, through the South End, and into downtown. This shows our temperature hotspots, Chinatown in particular, areas of the South End. Roxbury, Dorchester, parts of Mattapan, East Boston as well. And so these are the focus areas for the heat plan. And then in taking a look at our heat duration, these are primarily in the denser parts of our city to the northeast, but the coastal areas in the southwest part of the city, they typically have higher tree canopy, lower building density, and so they're actually able to cool down over time as breeze is able to blow through. But I think one takeaway that I'd like to share with you all here is that for both of these maps, all of the city of Boston experiences extreme temperatures. And so the blue that you're seeing in the map, it only means cooler during heat waves. Not that it's cool, but these areas can still be above 90 degrees during heat waves. So in taking a look at some of the factors that are that affect one's experience of extreme heat, we know that the risk of extreme heat can disproportionately affect some people in communities more than others. So during the study, we wanted to clarify that there are many factors that can impact one's experience, including in individuals' unique experience, and the fact that some people are more at risk due to health-related impacts as well, and also taking a look at some of the built environment factors. And then in addition to some of these, we wanted to take a look at elements of neighborhood history and systems of racism. And by considering our neighborhood history and various social systems that have influenced infrastructure and development policy, we're trying to better understand why there are some areas that are hotter than others and really factor that into how we design solutions. As a part of the study, we conducted an analysis on the impacts of extreme heat on the impacts of redlining on extreme heat today. So we used the 1930s homeowners loan corporation map alongside various extreme heat and land cover metrics. The map underlaying the HOLC layers that you're seeing is our heat duration map. And so taking a look at some of these extreme heat and land cover metrics, we essentially mapped areas that were graded best, still desirable, declining, and hazardous by the HOLC map. One thing to note about these maps that were used during the 30s and 40s, they mapped these series of grades to rate the riskiness of providing money, loans to people who wanted to purchase houses, land, and other types of real estate. And these grades were largely defined based on race, whether you were an immigrant, your country of origin, and also socioeconomic status. What we found through this analysis, though, was that the grades, areas that were graded best or still desirable historically, are today cooler for all of the heat metrics that we took a look at. So this is urban heat island, land surface temperature, the daytime and the evening time temperatures as well. And the areas that were historically redlined are hotter across all of these metrics at over 7 degrees Fahrenheit in the day and almost 4 degrees Fahrenheit in the evening time using our modeled heat maps. And then additionally, areas that were graded best or still desirable historically today have 20% more parkland and 40% more tree canopy. And so this information that we received from this analysis is what we are using to help factor in where we prioritize implementation of various heat resilience and mitigation strategies and initiatives. One in particular is our Boston Tree Alliance, where we do focus on areas that today have higher social vulnerability and low tree canopy and high heat impacts. So designing for heat resilience, we've defined, taking all of these things into consideration, we've defined these 3 goals for how to integrate heat resilient design. One is reducing heat exposure, looking at both indoor and outdoor heat, and intensity and duration, The second is adapting to heat and helping residents adapt to heat. We can do this by expanding the choices for staying cool during heat waves and also improving awareness. And then the third is looking at how we can address sensitivities. And so this is considering some of the underlying social determinants of health and also other population impacts such as like health impacts as well. Pulling all of these things together, we have defined 26 strategies within the heat plan to address the impacts of heat by increasing access to cooling resources and also reducing localized extreme temperatures. These 8 layers essentially house the 26 strategies. The top row that you're seeing includes more operational and communications based, awareness building based strategies to increase access to cooling. And the second row includes strategies to reduce localized extreme temperatures in various aspects of both the private and the public realm. So looking at our parks, our streets, buildings, and then how zoning and planning and also permitting can facilitate heat resilience as well. So that was a bit of a summary on the heat plan. And next, I'd just like to share a couple examples of near-term immediate impact strategies. The first is just taking a look at our pop-up cooling stations. This is a program that has been ongoing for the past 3 years, but it was recently revamped this summer. So these are cooling stations that can be checked out by local organizations for publicly accessible community events. They can also be used for heat emergencies. They're deployed by the Office of Emergency Management, and also for city workers, like for example, firefighters. And we even post them outside City Hall. And they can also be deployed by the community organizations that request them or by city departments that may have events as well. In addition to those, we have our outdoor misting towers. These are more for semi-permanent use. So you can set them up over like a period of days. Let's say you have a 3-day heat wave and set them up. We had set a few up in Boston's Chinatown, as it's a significant heat spot with limited access to cooling resources, especially outdoor cool spaces. And so we work with the Office of Emergency Management as well as the fire department to hook these up to fire hydrants as well. So we're able to actually increase access to water because we're able to access fire hydrants now with the help of the fire department. The second project that I wanted to share is in partnership with our Boston Centers for Youth and Families, which also serve as some of our cooling centers. And so the goal behind this is to expand access to outdoor cooling, both water, potable water, and also shade. This is an expansion off of the 9 BPLs, Boston Public Libraries, that have also had outdoor spaces integrated. And here you can see just like the setup at 3 of our locations in Roslindale, Mission Hill, and Mattapan. The focus of these, though, were primarily for youth that use the community centers, but the overall goal here is to understand how people are interacting with these resources so that when the capital construction period comes up again, we can consider some of these improvements to be integrated into the new design or new improvements. The final example I wanted to share with you is around the co-benefits of stormwater infrastructure, particularly green infrastructure and extreme heat. So we are actually in the process of retrofitting 30 of our bus shelters with green roofs along bus route 28. So we're working with a local small business and also a youth empowerment organization, Youth Build Boston, to install these green roofs. Can see the process here on the right-hand side. The goal of this is to provide shade, first of all. Our bus shelters are not shaded, they are glass. And so it's like being in a sauna when the sun is beating down. So number one, to provide shade within the bus shelter, and then also to support decreasing microclimate temperatures, and also increase stormwater retention, and also to facilitate pollinator corridors and biodiversity. So these are some of the things that we've been working on over the past few months. And that concludes my presentation. I will go ahead and pass it on over to Victoria. Thank you.
Thanks, Zoe. Thank you, everyone. I am going to just talk briefly about some of the activities that are happening at the federal level. There is a lot going on right now. I wanted to let you all know about it. And also, when we give the presentation, there's a chock full of links in this. And most of this has happened in the past 4 or 5 years. There are a lot of resources and efforts that were happening already, but these are all new that I'm going to talk about. So there's more that I can share later. But the first one, you've heard about this terrible government acronym, National Integrated Heat Health Information System. It's a collection of about 20 or so federal agencies working together for an all-of-government approach to extreme heat over many timescales. We have a new website where you can find information on everything that NIHIS is doing, heat.gov. It's a great one-stop shop for emergency information as well as long-term solutions. And just a couple days ago, we released a national heat strategic plan so that all federal agencies can work together to develop solutions that are science-based and coordinate on resources and communications and decision-making around heat so that we can really help the American people and prevent more illnesses and deaths. Every year, we have a public awareness campaign on social media, government-wide. That's going on, I think, right now. So those are shareable social media posts. And every year, there is a virtual open to the public meeting on all things related to extreme heat. And government agencies are there, but also local, state, private, nonprofit groups. So that's a really great place to get together. Federal legislation, for the first time, has included extreme heat and urban heat islands and other related topics, both in the bipartisan infrastructure bill, but also Inflation Reduction Act. The EPA is underlined because there's a link there, but Department of Agriculture, Forest Service, Department of Transportation, they all have large amounts of grants. Some are closed, some are still open, that provide funding for both research and implementation of activities related to extreme heat, and things that are related, like urban forestry, the mitigation strategies, as well as climate resilience, things that really help address extreme heat. So that's a first of its kind and very exciting. Each agency, most of us are doing individual things at EPA. We have been doing urban heat island work for 30 years. We still have a website and a newsletter with a variety of resources. So check that out. We do a series of data aggregations that document actual evidence of climate change impacts happening right now. Several are related to heat, including changes in heat waves, heat-related illness and death, daytime temperatures. So that's a great resource for documenting current impacts. OSHA, this is a first of its kind as well. Previous to now, there was no national government-wide way to protect workers from extreme heat. They are proposing a law that would do this for the first time, and it would protect both indoor and outdoor workers. This is very important. Some states are doing it, but we definitely need a federal common standard. NOAA is by far the lead. Most of what you see here is available on the heat.gov website. They've been doing local mapping campaigns to help cities through citizen science to map their heat islands so that they can understand where the hot spots are and exactly how hot they are. There is a challenge, a government program. We can provide prizes and challenges, and they're doing one which the goal is to help local governments and communities kind of, a lot of times we do an exercise for what's going to happen in a flood or a terrorist attack. This helps communities plan out what they would do in a similar way, but related to an extreme heat emergency, so that they can have their sort of act together before it's needed. This challenge will help give prizes for innovative solutions. A heat governance model is really great. It's a framework to help communities sort of analyze how they're responding to heat and going back and evaluating and measuring their progress. The Centers of Excellence, Lad and Sarah talked about that, so I won't go into that, but they are like another great first of its kind way to give direct help to communities to make things happen. And recently there's a lot of tools, data tools, mapping tools, analysis tools. These are just some of the new ones that there's links here, but most of them I think you can get to from heat.gov. The first one helps you identify where it takes a variety of data, overlays it, and helps communities understand where the folks live that might be most likely to have impacts on their health from extreme heat. The Weather Service has a new experimental tool for forecasting heat-related impacts ahead of time, what will occur in a 24-hour period. The Census Bureau has worked with another couple agencies to identify, I think it's experimental as well. So that just means we want feedback on these tools because we're going to upgrade them. But this tool helps you identify households that might lack air conditioning. This is really important for targeting your heat solutions. And that's all I have right now. I didn't want to take too much time. Happy to answer questions. I will turn it back to Jill.
Thank you very much. I appreciate all of your feedback and all of your stories and experiences. Thank you for sharing. And throughout the presentation, we have been assembling questions from the audience. Please continue to submit any questions you may think of. We will get to as many as we can until 2:30 p.m. Eastern time. So let's get started. We have a lot of really great questions. One or two have asked about some of the data sources that were used in the study mentioned by Lad and Sarah. What, if any, are the most important data sources you use? Are they publicly available? For example, you mentioned mean surface temperature. Where is that data available? We'll start with that one. There's a couple on data. I was going to combine them, but.
Okay. Yeah, Sarah, so maybe I'll speak about data generally for communities, and then if you want to speak specifically to the research that we did, right? And so I think just generally for heat planning, a lot of communities across the US, it's currently a problem, right? Because we have a disparity in the information that's available for communities to do heat planning, I would say, and a lot of that siloed off and kind of separated into different departments. And so urban planning departments may have vegetation maps or urban forestry maps that can be really helpful. Some regional COGs or transportation or environmental agencies may have land surface temperature maps, which can be helpful. I think public health departments at the county level, here in Arizona, we're do a very sophisticated job of tracking heat-related illnesses and deaths, but that's not the case in most of the rest of the United States, right? But I think it's hard to prevent heat-related illnesses and deaths if you're not properly tracking them and don't know where they're occurring and what's actually causing them, right? Are they occurring within homes without air conditioning, on the workplace, during transit? Are they with the unhoused population? So I think kind of bolstering those information sources locally can be really important too. So kind of a whole suite. We don't recommend one single perfect data source. I think you have to use quite a few of those, including future climate projections. I'd say the National Climate Assessment has very user-friendly kind of projections by region that you can go to as well. And then Sarah, do you want to speak specifically about the PERS for Heat project?
Yeah, sure. And I would just say, like, just to follow up quickly on that too, I think as part of the center, our Center of Excellence, but one of the things we're hoping to do is to kind of provide a menu of like what are those different types of data sources out there that communities could use. And also I think really key is thinking about like, what are you trying to use it for, right? So different data sources are going to be more or less relevant for different things, and different scales, right, of decision making. Like, are you trying to figure out just where are, generally some of the hottest areas, or where your population's at risk, right? Like those are going to be different things. So for example, in the PERS for heat, we have generally used either land surface temperatures, which are usually derived from satellite data, so remote sensing data. It is publicly available through, for example, Landsat satellites, and that can be analyzed using Google Earth Engine by someone with pretty basic remote sensing skills. I mean, that still is, you'd still need somebody who is trained in GIS and remote sensing, but at least the data is freely available. And there are more and more data sets that are actually already sort of pre-processed out there that are based on this kind of information. We've used that. We've also used the NOAA supported heat mapping campaigns, which use a combination of community gathered sort of citizen science data on temperatures with modeling to produce heat maps for communities, and communities apply to be part of that. So we've used some of those, the urban heat island mapping campaigns. And so that's for heat hazards. And then I would say for the more of the social side, right? So that's kind of like where is it hotter in the city? And then we also look at where are populations that are potentially more vulnerable. And so we have used the CDC's Social Vulnerability Index for basically all of the cities because it's freely available at the census tract scale for every, for the entire US.
Great, thank you. Another question for Lad and Sarah, and Zoe and Victoria, you can always jump into. How does a community become part of the heat resilience communities cohort? Where will that call for participation be announced? And what are the basic criteria for being selected?
Sure.
Yeah, do you want to take the first call, and I'll take
I was going to say
the broader information available?
Yeah, I can start off.
Sure.
So we will be putting out a call for applications hopefully by the end of the year, like later this year. And if you go to heat.gov and you join the Heat Beat newsletter, I think it's pretty safe to say that the announcement will be posted there. So if you are part of that and just follow it, then I think you should receive the call. You can also reach out specifically to us, or, we can put you in contact with like the center staff to kind of be on a list of interested communities as well. So they can send the application, but it will be coming out. And in terms of the criteria, that is something that we are still working out among the center leadership. But I think one thing to note is that it is going to require a decent amount of effort on the part of the communities. And so, we definitely need communities that are, that have some capacity to, to really engage with this and are, interested in really, working to implement this framework, right? Because it is going to take some time, and the center just doesn't have enough resources for us to, to do everything for the communities. We're going to be providing guidance and training and everything, but there's definitely going to need to be engagement by the participants.
Yeah, and I would just add that communities we're defining very loosely currently, and so it's not just a city, quote unquote, or a jurisdiction, but it could be something a little bit more open-ended than that. So maybe a rural unincorporated community that has decision makers at the county level that have the capacity to kind of go through some of the framework steps too. So we're trying to keep it open-ended to really apply to a broad number of communities of different resource types across the United States. And then I would say too that we recognize, and NOAA recognizes, that we are supporting 30 communities, but there's 19,000 incorporated cities and towns across the United States. And Sarah and I want all of them, each and every one of them, to be heat resilient, right? And so I think the other part of this center will be to use the information and use this piloted heat resilient communities framework and kind of refine it, and then it'll all be publicly accessible so that communities that aren't part of this initial cohort can kind of take from the best practices and all of the materials that we're developing. So that's really the goal with this too.
Great. That sort of leads perfectly into a question that was submitted about the scorecard and community capacity building. What options are there for capacity and capability enhancement? And do you have any thoughts on how to assess whether local governments or nonprofit partners have the capacity? How you're going to, define staffing, resources in terms of dollars, responsibilities, technical expertise to move the plans forward in the long run. Are there criteria established, or is that all going to be baked into the application process?
Yeah, so Sarah, I'll start off with one idea that we have to address the fact that the communities we're hoping will apply will have different levels of capacity. And so we're testing out kind of a tiered system where you can have an entry point for maybe a community that's really committed to be part of the center cohort, but doesn't have a whole suite of staff available to run through a whole PERS analysis and do all of that. So we're setting it up so that you can kind of scale this up, and in the future, if you did have more resources, potentially could kind of go to the next step. And so I think for that reason specifically, Sarah had covered some of the other heat plan evaluation tools we've been developing, and I think PERS is a fairly complicated one that does require some ability to kind of sit down and code through plans and follow the 3-point test. We've really found that the plan quality evaluation for heat resilience approach, the checklist that she mentioned, is a little bit more simple and can be done by any practitioner across the United States. And so I think that that might be one that's a little bit more accessible. It doesn't require a whole research and kind of university team backing you up. So we're kind of playing with these tools, trying to make them, more user friendly as we go along and as we refine them. But Sarah, what are your thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I think just the other thing, I wasn't sure if you're thinking about assessing capacity around, heat planning, heat resilience more broadly. I would just say one resource that you could take a look at is NOAA's recent heat governance maturity model, which really tries to break down kind of what are different components of heat governance, and like a sort of spectrum of maturity, right? From sort of less mature to more mature, what those actually look like, right? And so that could be one sort of framework that you could look at. And I think in terms of communities actually assessing their own capacity, there's also those tabletop and, trying to really understand like where are weaknesses potentially, or where are opportunities. There's also like the tabletop exercises that Noah's doing, and that actually was one of the foundations for that governance maturity model, which is about sort of identifying that. So yeah, I think those could be resources to look at as well that already exist. And I think they just released the call for the next sort of cohort of communities that want to participate in those heat tabletop exercises.
Yeah, and Sarah, I'll just mention the other, I guess the third part of this answer is sort of again that with 19,000 communities across the US, right? Some rural communities don't even have like a city planner, right? And so or may have a town manager that has shared responsibilities, and so I think we recognize that in those situations we need multi-scalar heat governance, and so the idea that counties have a level of responsibility, states have a level of responsibility, and then of course the federal agencies. And so kind of here in Arizona, how we've partially addressed that currently is we have a chief heat officer at the state level in the public health department that's really supporting both the metropolitan areas in Arizona, but also kind of shining more light and attention to some of those less resourced rural communities and tribal nations that need support as well.
Great, thank you. One quick question that relates to this conversation is, are you considering, and I think you just answered that, but regional organizations or councils of government, would they be qualified as or can be considered potentials for that? Great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Okay. Next question is for Zoe. Can you share some of the examples? You mentioned 26 strategies in your plan. People would like to hear some more examples about what strategies Boston is considering for the long-term approach to heat.
Sure, happy to. So as I mentioned, the strategies are sort of nested in those 8 buckets. But looking at some of the specific strategies, I'm starting at the top though. One of our number 1 is focused on like operations and communications. So we've developed a task force, the Boston Extreme Temperatures Response Task Force, and this is like acknowledging that we have extreme temperatures both in the summer and the winter, and we have very similar like organizational structures and deployment of resources for the winter as we do for the summer. And so just thinking about how this forum is a place to look at extreme temperatures broadly. But this is sort of a group that gets together to understand what is deployment of resources for the summer looking like, and then for every heat emergency, taking time to check in about what's actually being deployed, what do we need to, like, are there elements that we need to sort of fix or revise, where are some of the gaps and how can we like fill in, and then a bit of a retro saying how did we do for this heat wave, or how did we do over the summer. Other strategies include, like, within this same layer of like operations and communications, is looking at a heat sensor network. This is also in a bit of a pilot phase. We're working with BU, A Better City, and the Boston Foundation, looking at what heat sensor data means for us and how do we use it. And then other strategies, this is related to one of the projects that I had mentioned, pop-up relief. So this is really about meeting people where they're at. This is strategy 2.1. So, whether it's like at a public community event, or whether it's sort of on the corner of this, like, particularly busy part of the city, whether it's City Hall, how can we bring cooling, whether it's through misting or whether it's through shade or both. There are programmatic strategies, like looking at how we can expand a community climate leadership program, which looks at the capacity that's already existing within communities and the interest to engage in climate related work, and how we can resource and empower people to do that. We're also looking at extreme temperature plans for outdoor workers, and the Office of the Workforce Office, Equity Workforce Office, is really moving forward on a lot of that, and looking at trainings and various materials for like vendors that we hire, but also internally for city departments that have people as outdoor workers. So I only looked at like 3 of these layers, but I would recommend reviewing our executive summary that outlines all of the strategies on the page. And I'm happy to post that link in the chat too.
Thank you. We have another question related to your misters. Do the misters use large quantities of water? What is the source of that water? And for example, do the tents come with a tank, or are they connected to the water system somehow? And how can communities reconcile using large amounts of water to cool down if there's a water shortage during a drought?
So the pop-up cooling tents and the standing misters don't actually use too much water. It's sort of akin to like flushing a toilet or taking a 20-minute shower or something like that, but not all at once. So for the misters, it's very like fine particulate mist. So you're not getting like a shower upon you. For some of our water features at like our Boston Centers for Youth and Families, the water features actually vary. We do have a couple of mist systems there, but some of them are water tables where you fill them up for a little bit and then the kids have water to play with for a bit of time and then you can empty it out. Similarly with our with the standing misters, it's again like particulate mist, and it's also by demand. So you can press a button and then you can enjoy the mist and then it will go off and you can walk away. So it's not a whole lot of water being used all at once. And we also only have 3 of those units, and we have about 11 of the tents, and some may not all be active at once. There was a question around the materials that is used for the misting tents. Essentially, it's like your typical, like, believe it might be a bit of a polyester blend, but it's like your typical tent, like if you are having an event, and you stand that up and you hook a perforated hose to it. That's essentially the misting tent. They are designed to be like easily accessible and easily built by other organizations as well. They're not super fancy. Our first year of developing them, they were incredibly scrappy. Like we had unbranded, blindingly white like tents. They were essentially designed for any organization who might regularly table and have these materials to be able to just whip them up and like set up the structure. We use a typical garden hose, like 30-50 foot hose, and we typically hooked them up to any building that had a potable water source. We always made sure that wherever we were bringing them had a potable water source, so they don't use an external tank. But we are looking into options for a like portable tank system so that we can increase that access to water to areas that might not have potable water or any water access at all. Jill, were there other questions nested within that I did not get to?
I think you covered most of the question because you did cover where they were made, and it sounds like you're making them within your organization. It seems like a great, I mean, I think this is a brilliant idea. When you first presented it, I was like, that's brilliant. And it seems like something Baltimore, for example, teaches people how to create their own rain barrels. So I can envision teaching communities how to make these things for themselves, if they're that easy to construct and make out of common things that you can buy at Home Depot.
We do actually have a how-to guide for this and a couple of other strategies on boston.gov/heat. It's on our summer cooling guide.
Great, thank you. One of the questions, and we get this a lot, it's sort of there's this tension between the immediate solutions like cooling tents and the long-term solutions like removing pavement. Can you give some examples of long-term strategies that have been successful to reduce heat island effect? And a little bit, I think anybody on the webinar can, any of the four of you can cover sort of that, how do we deal with that tension? I feel like there is a tension between long-term solutions and short-term solutions, but the short-term solutions are the ones that might save someone's life during a heat event. So if you could just talk about that a little bit.
Sure.
Could I start, guys? Yeah, at first I want to say that the federal government has a lot of tools. So go to heat.gov and look under the tools. Landsat is a federal government resource. NASA has information, climate indicators. I just want to mention that there are federally wide tools. And if anyone has any questions, come to me. But also what you mentioned, I think that's a really good question. Heat has to be dealt with on a time scale frame. And I'm more of an expert on the longer term prevention. What I like to tell folks is that we can control our urban microclimates, and temperatures can be reduced regardless of, other things in climate change. And there are some low-hanging fruits that you can do, I think, at the same time as you're dealing with these emergency situations, and they kind of solve both problems at once. For example, a cool roof is not that complicated. There's a lot of information on it to make it easier. There's a lot of local governments and states that have policies, and you can that will cool down the building to protect indoor heat. It saves energy, obviously. And then also you could use that as emergency shelter, that building, to make sure that when you have an emergency situation, folks can stay even cooler. And then you're dealing with the long-term effect at the same time by reducing the microclimate if you do enough cool roofs. So it is a tension, but I think as planners, I'll let Lad and Sarah talk about how you plan for long-term and short-term.
Yeah, so like Sarah and I were talking about, it's both heat mitigation, long-range strategies, and heat management, often which are short-term strategies. And I think the thing to kind of keep in mind is that we're already developing and redeveloping cities every day with zoning choices and kind of land use decisions, right? So whether we care about heat or not, our cities are changing, right? And so we just have to make sure that heat as a consideration is incorporated into every new building that's built, every new park that's put in, every new road widening project. We think about heat the same that we would force a private developer or a transportation department to think about flood hazards, or out in the West maybe like wildfire hazard, right? So I think it has to be incorporated across all of those. I think the $1 million question is like, what exact, if you had $1 million, what would you spend it on to reduce like heat related impacts to people, maybe, And I think that's where you get into some tough community discussions that you have to have, really. So I would say here in Arizona, about half of our heat deaths, which have hit record numbers the last 10 years in a row, are the unhoused folks, and that population continues to grow here as it does nationwide, right? And so, you know, if we wanted to reduce our heat deaths in half, just get every person off the street and into a safe housing situation. And I think that's an easy answer, but it's not easy to implement, right? And so I think kind of having those important community conversations to determine what values you're willing to spend money on is part of the answer to that. Sarah, I think you were unmuting too. Do you have something to add?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, I think this relates to one of the other questions about like the fact that, say, site development plans are not necessarily reviewed for heat, right? And I think that is what we were talking about too when we said, you know, that we identify often in the communities that we've applied the PERS to, almost like half or sometimes even more than half of the policies that we score as an unknown impact on heat. And that's because, yeah, the development, we know that these investments and developments are going to impact it, but it's not always clear. And, this is our way of saying, hey, like, these should be reviewed to figure out if there's a way to make them, more, more sensitive to heat, right? And in the specific sort of site design. But absolutely, that's not something that's, really required right now in most places.
And in Boston, I can just share a few examples of where we're integrating into the long-term piece. But I do agree it's definitely a both and situation. I'll say we do work with a number of departments across the city of Boston, both within the planning process for the heat plan, and then also as we are implementing a number of strategies. The Office of Green Infrastructure has been in the process of implementing um, an environmental standard for curb cuts in particular, looking at how if any curb cuts are introduced, then there are these 5 design alternatives that integrate green infrastructure that need to be used. So looking at bioretention in the right-of-way, infiltration, tree pits, porous paving, subsurface infiltration, and also something on the lighter end, looking at one-time seeding. So that's one way that like a policy is looking into the long-term integration of elements that can facilitate heat resilience. One of our other sort of larger site-specific plans is with reconnecting Chinatown. We received a grant from USDOT, Reconnecting Communities grant for almost $2 million to look at capping a part of I-90, which is a significant impact on urban heat island effect in Chinatown. And so looking at how we can cap about 4 parcels across I-90 with the integration of green space and other cooling elements. What these parcels will look like is, still in development. We're in the process of onboarding teams to take a look at that. But this is a significant project to look at how we can mitigate the environmental effects of this like pretty significant transportation system that greatly affects Chinatown. We're also looking at like planning for future parks. And this is largely an effort that's run by the Parks Department. They've outlined a parcel priority plan, and within the most recent open space and recreation plan, they've identified sort of priority areas for expanding the park system as well. And so this is like both looking at how we can take care of our existing park system, but how we're expanding accessible open space and green space. And that is also like paired with how we're going to plan for maintaining these areas, especially for maintaining our trees. Over the past couple of years, the Parks Department has been working on tripling its workforce that focuses on the workforce that's been focusing on trees specifically. So we have a new urban forestry division that's about 2 years old. And they've been doing really amazing work with looking at how best we can like care for trees long term. The last program that I'll mention is, and I have mentioned it a little earlier, was around our Boston Tree Alliance program. And this is in partnership with the Office of Green Infrastructure and the Parks Department, looking at how we partner with community-based organizations and landowners, renters as well, about educating people about trees, but also planting and caring for trees. So the purpose of this program is to provide grant funds to community-based organizations to do education work and also plant and maintain trees in partnership with residents. And as a part of this program, there's 2 years of maintenance that are integrated into the initial grant. And we're working out in future grant structures, how we integrate maintenance grants for trees as well, both for trees that have been planted through the program, but also thinking about how we can support existing trees that have not been planted through the program.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. We are coming up on time. And so usually we conclude by giving everyone a chance to give any final remarks or give any information that you thought of during the discussion that you forgot to mention, but would like to do so now. And if you don't have anything, I generally ask if you have any advice for those of us who are working in the field and may feel overwhelmed by the scale of the things that we need to pay attention to in regards to all things planning, but in particular, the impacts of climate change.
I'm happy to, oh, sorry, go ahead, Victoria, please.
Oh, I'll be quick. I think that's a fair question. With extreme heat, I feel like there's so much that we need to do that anything you can do right now is really helpful. Even just, going around your neighborhood, and if you see an unhoused person during a heat wave, give them some bottles of water. It might not seem like much, but I know that it's been received in other communities really well. And also, and keep in mind that what I said before, the urban climate, I believe this sad story about climate change and people dying from heat, there are solutions that you can implement. Even if you just plant a tree next to your house, you're going to reduce some temperatures and you're going to provide shade for someone walking by or whatever. So I feel it really empowers me to work in this field because at least for urban areas, I know rural folks experience heat too, of course, but there is a lot that we can do that we're not doing, and it's not too difficult. We just have to educate and keep raising awareness and building capacity, which these guys are doing really well.
Maybe I could make a final comment that actually I think kind of builds on that. This is one thing that we maybe didn't really mention out of our results, but that I think is really important, which is that actually the vast majority of the policies that we identify in our, in the PERS for heat, in city plans right now actually are not explicitly being proposed as a heat strategy. There are things like reducing automobiles, right? Adding new green stormwater infrastructure, new parks, right? Green spaces. So I think there's a lot of things that, like you were saying, Victoria, that actually can enhance heat resilience that we're actually already doing or planning to do for other reasons. And as more and more people are, concerned about heat, I think there's an opportunity to really highlight the co-benefits of some of these, strategies and interventions. And hopefully that will actually increase the likelihood that they ultimately get implemented. So just something to say, hey, maybe just take a look at the things you're already hoping to do, and see which ones might have an added heat resilience benefit and, really sort of promote that. I think you'll find there's quite a lot.
Yeah, I'll just wrap up really quickly by saying kind of call to action. Extreme heat is the #1 weather-related killer for the country. Of course, we know that with climate change, those deaths are going to continue to rise across the United States in both hot places like Arizona, but temperate places, Boston, everywhere is going to be affected by extreme heat. Yet it's the last climate hazard that we really planned for or thought about. I think the positive part of that is 15 years ago, all of the climate change resources were related to flooding and sea level rise, which of course deserved attention and have impacts of their own. But there was very little about heat planning. Of course, Victoria's program was one of the very first in the United States that kind of highlighted some of those resources. I think it's a very different landscape today than it was even 5 years ago. And so there's just so many more resources and examples and best practices that folks can draw from. So if you're kind of thinking about planning for heat for the first time right now, I think there's a wealth of information out there and no reason to kind of hold back and get started today.
And to build off of what was said, that there is, as Victoria had mentioned, there's so much to be done. And also, as Sarah was saying, there are so many examples of where there may be like heat resilience policy or heat resilience work, but might not be explicitly heat resilience. And I think similarly, there are so many organizations, not just within the public sector, but also community organizations, private sector that are doing a lot of really great work. And so I just like to say that all of this work is done in coalition and in partnership with folks. And that's how we'll sort of accomplish our goals of really growing and becoming more heat resilient. Yeah.
That's a perfect way to end. Thank you so much. I feel inspired by all of you. I would like to offer my sincerest gratitude to our wonderful speakers for joining us today and for sharing their work on this important issue. Thank you to everyone who attended, and as always, thank you to John Coleman, who helps keep our webinars running smoothly. The complete recording of today's webinar will be posted online. As we mentioned earlier, August is Climate Month for the Smart Growth webinar series, so please look at our website for our upcoming webinar next Thursday on post-disaster housing resilience, featuring the Greater New Orleans region and examples from post-Katrina planning. When you exit today's webinar, you will be asked to participate in a short evaluation. Please take a few moments to provide feedback so we can continue to improve the webinar experience. Only those who indicated that they require a certificate during registration will receive one via email following the webinar. Please keep an eye on your inbox for details on future webinars sponsored by the Maryland Department of Planning and the Smart Growth Network. Thank you again for joining us and have a great day.